Welcome to Eight Sided Freaks. This is episode number 4, and this is Vendetta Sports Media. And this week, it's a pretty simple rundown. We're kind of in between two Apex fight nights, so we don't really have these large, massive topics to talk about. Last week, we were speculating that maybe we'd get the UFC 300 fight announcement. We did not get that, so we do not have that to talk about. So we're kind of left with these two Apex shows, not really much else for news. So today, the plan is we're going to take the biggest fights off UFC Vegas 85, which happened last week. We're going to recap those. We're going to preview next week's fights, UFC Vegas 86. We're going to do the main and co-main. So that is the plan for today. It isn't the most star-heavy show with the best fights, but thankfully next week we'll be able to preview a pay-per-view, and that is headlined by Volk and Ilya Zaporia. And in my opinion, that is one of the best fights the UFC can make right now. So we have big things coming on the horizon, but this week is going to be a little bit slower. All right. Now, for this week, we can get right into the main event from last week. Roman Dolidze, Nassourdine Imavov. Jerry, you can go ahead and get us started. What'd you make of this fight, and what'd you make of Imavov's performance?
I think Imavov did what he had to do to get the win. Obviously, it wasn't the prettiest thing in the world. I know there was some doctor stoppages at times, but it's one of those fights that he did what he had to do, beat the higher ranked guy, and I'm interested to see what he does next, considering the mess we have at the top of the lightweight division. I guess middleweight division at the moment. I don't know why I blanked on that one, but yeah, the middleweight division is kind of a mess, and we'll see what happens because obviously not this weekend, but the following weekend with Topuria and Volk, they have the fight between Paulo Costa and Robert Whittaker, so that'll be interesting to see what happens there. I could see him fighting potentially the loser of that fight. Something like that would make sense to me, but as far as this one, he kind of dominated Dolidze for the most part. It's kind of surprised that there was a ref that had or a judge that had this fight as a draw, but that's just me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to touch on once we got a little bit further into this was the draw scorecard, because that was absolutely atrocious. But Anthony, what'd you make of the fight as a whole?
Um, Kind of a lot of the same things that Jerry said. I mean, it's hard to a win is a win, especially with that type of fight, two ranked fighters. Um, and I do want to say I think Imavov looked good in parts or in stretches to where it's like, okay, there is something here, but it was I don't know. It wasn't a great performance by either of them in a sense because it just like when you get so gassed eventually too towards the end of the fight, it's fighting just looks sloppy and bad. But I mean, I think they both showed some good things, both showed some bad things, and then to entertainment factor overall, there was enough illegal kicks and yelling at people and stuff like that. So I mean, overall, it was actually about the most middleweight main event you could make for someone that's not an Izzy or Robert Whittaker, actually. So that actually kind of summed up the middleweight right
Yeah,
there.
that is a good point. This is the middleweight division as we have right now, and I agree that this was, Imavov did exactly what he needed to do to get a win, and to me, it felt like the first round he put so much out there. He had Dolidze hurt so bad, you can argue that it should have been stopped in the first round. First round was very dominant, and then after that, it was like, all right, I've got this guy. I can hit him whenever I want to, but I can't gas out hitting him because he had Dolidze. It felt to me like Dolidze never recovered from the first big exchange. So then it was, I can jab him whenever I want, I can kick him when I want, but I can't gas out beating him up because then Dolidze, we saw in the fourth round, still had some scrambling, still attacked some leg locks. So if Imavov would have gassed out trying to finish him, he probably ends up getting finished in some sort of heel hook type submission. So he couldn't really put too much out there to go get the finish. And even though Imavov hurt Dolidze, he doesn't hit the hardest when it comes to being the middleweight. He's more of a, he's going to pace you to a decision. He's going to outland you. He's going to stay safe and not get hit much. So he did that. It was a good performance on his side of things. and he'll probably get a bump up in competition. That was one of the things that I thought coming in, that the winner would get a bump up. So I think the loser of the Whitaker and Paulo Costa fight is a fair fight. But if it's Paulo Costa, he may have to wait 2 years to get that fight, unfortunately. Um, One of the other things I wanted to ask was, do you guys feel like Roman Dolidze has kind of hit a wall and has regressed? Because in my opinion, he's 35, and to me, it felt like he aged to 35 overnight. He looked much better against Vettori. When he was 34, he didn't look 34, he looked 29, and now he's 35 and he looks 40. So do you guys think I'm right on this? Do you think I'm wrong? Where do you guys kind of fall on Dolidze's performance and how he looked in there? And then Anthony, you can go ahead this time.
Yeah, I wanted to say because I had done a couple of those, before they ranked articles on fighters where that are unranked that I think could be ranked in possible title contenders, and I had picked Dolidze, but yeah, it's not looking too good anymore. Because I want to say I don't remember, was that the Tory fight was last year, and I remember it was pretty close. I even thought Dolidze might have won. I haven't seen it again since though, but I remember thinking it was really close. And then to turn in for the next performance, just looking slow. And like you said, maybe I'm not giving not credit, but not giving him enough for he just never recovered after that first round. But it was all the things that you see him do on a good night in the office. They weren't really there too often throughout that fight, and so I think definitely he could be hitting a wall on some things. But who's his coach again?
He's at Extreme Couture with Nick Sick and
Right,
Strickland and Curtis and those guys.
because with Nick Sick, you hear all about all these game plans and stuff, and then it just seemed like there was no real adjustments or game planning happening. And not to say that it wasn't Dolidze from being so tired and already battered a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. For first 5 round fight, it wasn't ideal for someone that still has aspirations to go higher. It did look like he was plateauing.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think on last week's episode, I said this is the beginning of his final chance at going for a title. I think he needed to win this fight and kind of start moving up, because if he lost, which he ultimately did, at 35, and with the way the middleweight division's going, obviously we have that star-studded top, but also this upcoming weekend, Jack Hermansson, Joe Pyfer. Joe Pyfer is one of those dangerous up-and-comers that the way he looked, I think he could potentially beat Roman Dolidze. So that's something like this new generation's coming in, and there's these new guys, and Dolidze's kind of stuck in that middle where I don't think he'll ever make it a title run now. And sad as it is for him, it's how the fight game works. Not everyone gets a title shot. Majority of people really don't even get close to it.
Yeah. And a couple more things I'll add on here real quick is I think he won the Vettori fight, and that ultimately hurts him a lot. And I know that was pretty much one round apiece. Round 3 was pretty close. I've watched that fight at least 3 times and scored it every time I thought Dolidze won the last round. I watched it before Cannonier fought Vettori. I watched it before Dolidze fought last weekend, and I watched it live all 3 times. Thought Dolidze won. So and that's the type of fight where you lose to Vettori, and now you're fighting Imavov instead of who would he have fought? Maybe a Duplessis, maybe a Cannonier. Maybe he gets a Whitaker fight. You never know how the matchmaking plays out if he wins. And the other thing I'll say is that, in my opinion, Dolidze has always kind of been a one-trick pony on the feet. Very powerful guy, those big hooks. Not my favorite, but it works a lot better because he has such elite jiu-jitsu. But in this fight, I think he went from those hooks were never fast. They were slow. And in this fight, he went from being slow to he looked very slow, which cuts your chances of landing those shots in a half, basically, even more extreme than that. It makes it almost impossible to land. So it makes it hard to really get excited about Dolidze. And it sucks because there's some potential there. There's some talent there, but he got started in MMA very, very late. This is a 35-year-old with less than 20 fights. So it is kind of a shame, even though it is kind of the reality of the situation for Dolidze. All right.
That was
And
my one last thing, real quick. That was even when I wrote the
mhm.
article the first time. It's because even at that level, I was hoping for some progression too in the striking. But yeah, it is. It's just too late. It's too late.
hmm And I think that's reasonable because could you imagine if he added a jab, for example?
Hmm.
Could you imagine if he added some leg kicks, some body kicks? It's like there's some real potential to where, oh, he gets a good jab. Now you're all of a sudden you're landing those hooks more frequently because you can set them up better. So I don't think that's unreasonable at all. And I do want to touch on kind of the controversy surrounding this fight. The illegal kick and the draw scorecard are the two things that kind of stand out to me here. Um, I don't know how much you guys want to talk about the illegal kick because, in my opinion, this is very simple. And I just want to say this that rule should be changed. I think if you have two hands on the mat, you should be allowed to be hit. If you don't want to be in that position, you can escape from that position. Right now, we're seeing a lot of guys stall out positions just by putting two hands on the mat, when in reality, it's a very vulnerable position, but the rule set protects you. If you have a knee, a butt, an elbow, I think that's when you should be ruled down. What are your guys' opinion? What is your opinion on that rule and that potentially changing because California State Athletic Commission is trying to get that rule changed to where two hands on the mat doesn't make you a downed opponent? Jerry, take us away on that
I
one.
was gonna say that goes back to what we talked about last week of how the rules in different locations are so different, and there's not a single. Like you're saying, yeah, go to Canada. Things that happened at that pay per view wouldn't have happened had it been in the U.S. When now it's the thing of California goes and changes it. People in California, obviously, one thing it's legal. Now you might go to a different fight, go to Vegas, and do the same thing that's legal in California and get penalized. It's kind of like to me, like the NFL, for example. You need a knee, an elbow, something that to mark you as down. Fighting, it's so easy just to put your hands down and say, "Oh, I'm down. You can't hit me now." It's kind of like what you're saying, a stall tactic to avoid getting damage. I think it should change, but the rules are the rules. I have no issue with it being a point deduction in this instance. That's the rules. You knew what they were coming in. It's not like it's suddenly changed overnight. So that's my thoughts on at least that. And kind of surprised though that the judge that had it a draw gave that round to Dolidze.
Um, this, yeah, I am fine with them changing the rule. I agree. I've heard a lot of people like you shouldn't necessarily get like a complete cop out mid fight based off a rule of like not being hit. However, that just the one thing I understand is like, yeah, they know that rule's in place. It's still like every time I see it, for the most part, like the Uncle Live one, it's blatant. The Peter Yan one blatant. That Imavov one I thought was pretty blatant as well. I mean, it always feels like there's a pause, like a 1 or 2 second pause, and then the strike happens. And so that's why I don't get it. It's like it just feels like if you know the rules, you should know the rule, and it shouldn't seem it shouldn't. I shouldn't be able to watch him be down and go like, oh, he probably shouldn't kick him right now, and then I see him kick him, and I'm like, okay, well. But so I mean, I just don't understand how fighters keep doing it in a sense. I can see sometimes when it's like super quick or it's like bang bang, but these past couple ones have seemed a little iffy. And then as far as the 10-9, 10-8, I think didn't that ref not have the first round as a 10-8? I thought was the only problem. Otherwise, it would have been a 40, 48, 47 or 47, 46?
I will. So the ref that had it a draw, he the first round was a 10-9,
Yeah.
and then he gave Dolidze rounds 2 and 4. So he had Dolidze winning 2 of those rounds in there.
Mm-hmm. Which I mean, I think if you were trying your hardest to find Dolidze rounds, I think those would have been 2 and 4, if I remember correctly. I remember one round just off of control time, basically. It was like clinch. And then the other one, maybe he landed a couple strikes or like scrambled once.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I mean, I didn't quite see it that way, but I just think that the only reason that was a problem is because do you guys think there's any way that first round wasn't a 10-8?
I think the first round is a textbook 10-8.
Okay.
I think you can show that as like an example of what a 10-8 round should be.
Mhm.
Then there's a surprise that I guess only one of the judges had that as a 10-8 round. So I guess two of them thought it wasn't, which also kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. And I think round 4, I think is what happened in that round is Dolidze, the kick happens about halfway through that round, the illegal kick. And Dolidze's second half of that round is actually probably his best portion of the fight where he's scrambling, but that's him scrambling to positions after getting hit with the illegal kick. Before the illegal kick, he was getting beat up pretty badly on the feet. So it's kind of like you have this break and you have this pause. It almost feels like you're only scoring the second half of the round after the kick, which is not really how you're supposed to score that. And the one thing I will say about the kick is, Jerry, I agree with you. Even though I'd like to see that rule changed, that is a point in that scenario. And Anthony, great point about every time we see these. Well, not every time. 90% of the time, there's the pause of like, can I kick him? I'm gonna kick him, and then they're not allowed to kick him. There's been a handful of like the Arnold Allen and Mosvar Evalev's a decent example of like, is his hand down? Is it not down? We're kind of moving around, but like Piotr Jan kicking Eljo, he's on a knee. Same with Johnny Walker, and those are like obviously terrible. This one was pretty bad as well from Imavov. So yeah, it's some of these have been pretty stupid moves where, hey, it's illegal, don't kick him, and then right there comes the kick.
I mean, I still think back to that Piotr Jan one of, at least according apparently what the audio was saying was like, can I kick him? Should I knee him? And his coach was like, yeah, just do it. Not even thinking like, oh, here we go. Because there was a good, I want to say like 3 to 5 seconds of him just sitting there with the position, like thinking about it, kind of what Anthony was saying, and then just does it. And I'm like, man.
So probably just don't throw that strike. Let's
If you're questioning it, don't do it.
especially if they're up too. It
And then
seems like most of the time.
Exactly like that. Like,
Yeah. Jan had Sterling gassed and he was barely able to fight back, and that's when he hits him with it. And it's like, dude, you could have just stood up and told him to stand up and punched him again.
It'd be interesting to see how that entire bantamweight division could have been different had he not done that. But
yes,
Jan lost his next 4 after that, or 3 or something.
Yep. And
after being the scariest man ever, too.
After beating Jose Aldo nearly to like bad
places. Retirement, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Uriah.
Yeah, murdered Uriah. Good stretch. I will say, while we're on the topic of Jan, before we move on, that fight with Song Yadong, great fight, and a guy who's going to actually strike with them, and I think that's going to be a fun one.
Oh, it will be.
All right. Moving down to the co-main, we had Renato Moicano versus Drew Dober. This was actually ended up being a very competitive fight. 29-28. I know Moicano won cleanly, but I think it was pretty competitive that third round. Drew Dober goes for the lat drop, gets taken down. If that doesn't happen, who knows how that round goes. That ended up being a pretty decent scrap. What'd you guys make of the co-main? Anthony, we'll swing it over to you first.
Yeah, I was fine with it. I like Drew Dober a lot. Just watching him fight, I think he's very entertaining. And I don't know. There's a lot of laying down, which I'm never the biggest fan of. I hate the not trying to do damage to someone and kind of just taking the position and winning off that. But even with that, the way Drew Dober was able to win a round and finally escape, or it was just tough because whenever he'd start looking good on the feet, he'd get taken down. So there's that whole play of it. But overall, I think it was a good fight. I think obviously 29-28 was the right call. I just think it was a little unfortunate with the amount of control time that he was fine with not striking. Moicano, that is.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was honestly, the biggest thing for me in this one was I was surprised how few strikes we saw Drew Dober throwing. Landed only 36 total strikes to Moicano's 140 plus. So it was not the same sort of judo that I think we're used to seeing, where he's going out and swinging and trying to get finishes and all that. It was one of those things where I think he got cut. I don't know if it was the first round or second round. I also know there was like a little clash ahead, so they were both gushing for a bit there. And it's one of those things that, who knows, maybe that's part of the damage that the judges look at and see, oh, they're both bleeding. This guy's bleeding a bit more. I have no issue with obviously Moicano winning. I think he did what he had to do in rounds 1 and 3. It was one of those fights that was like, I kind of expected a little bit more on the feet from Dober, but Moicano knew exactly what to do and how to negate that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this fight was Drew Dober being concerned about getting choked out. I think that played a big factor in the number of significant strikes. I think it was more, I can't open up too much, because if I open up too much, he gives him a chance to get to the back. And to me, it felt like Drew Dober was willing to get taken down and go to his back to prevent Moicano from getting a back take and threatening a rear naked choke. Because Moicano has great rear naked chokes. And I felt it was one guy consistently only working to get to the back and one guy doing anything possible to not give his back up. And I think that result is what resulted in some of the, control time that wasn't very aggressive from the top, because you've got Dober going, I'm not going to give you my back. And if that means laying on my back, I'll do it. And you've got Moicano basically only working for the back, and it kind of creates a stalemate in between those two. So I kind of think that's how that went down. But good performance from Moicano. I thought it was kind of a bad matchup in the sense that, hey, if Drew Dober gets on the inside, he can knock you out. Last 7 wins by knockout. But, Moicano did a good job of avoiding that, so he deserves some credit for that, especially considering in the past he lost to Fiziev because he let Fiziev get on the inside and land that knockout shot. And not the same matchup, but some similarities there. Fiziev's obviously better than Dober, but you let Dober get on the inside, you can have trouble. And then for Moicano, do you guys like the Moicano post-fight interview of just, 5 minutes of absolute madness, basically, on the mic? Jerry, we'll let you go first.
I only caught the first half of it, but I've seen clips from it, and this is pretty much the same as his last fight after he beat Brad Riddell. Moicano wants money, and that's all he wants. He's doing what he has to do to make a name for himself and get him into that spotlight. We've seen many other fighters do this in the past, so I enjoy it. I think it's fun. I think he shows character and personality, so I'm curious to see what happens next, because there's all the talks of, I've seen Paddy Pimblett rumors of him fighting. I still think Dan Hooker's the next fight for him to make, so something like that, or a Jalen Turner, or maybe a stretch, but give him the rematch with Fiziev. See how much he has progressed, because he's sitting at 13 right now. Fiziev's at 8. Some of these other guys are all booked up. He's already fought RDA. Did lose to RDA, so maybe that one as well could be run back. But that's one. 2 Brazilians, RDA and Moicano at UFC 301 in Rio.
Actually, yeah, I'd like that. I'd say that. I don't know. I think it's a bit extra when I'm like. It's the same reason I guess I'm not the biggest fan of Sean Strickland. I think the best fighters and best type of trash talk and post fight are the ones that you get, about 3 questions and maybe 1 small tangent. And the people that can make the most out of that, like a McGregor every time, or Nate Diaz, where you get straight quotables from those like couple lines or whatever, or even Masvidal for in that way too. But I don't know. I think I was definitely sitting there. I like how he plugged himself though. I did like that. I think more people should do that. That's fire. But maybe it was just a little too long, I think. But it was definitely off the rails. And like I said, I was kind of laughing, and then immediately after that, I went to a group chat and I was just like, what is happening? And then, they were the same thing, but I think maybe it was a little too long, but if some people like it, I understand why.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I enjoyed it, but I do agree with the point that I'm like, we get to a certain point and I'm like, all right, this is getting off the rails here. We're getting a little wild here. We're going a little long here. But I think it's, good. Well, I say we throw him on UFC 301 on Brazil. Relatively entertaining guy. Put him on the stage for the press conference, and we'll see what he can do at a big stage on a press conference. Um, give him the shot there. I like the Drew Dober shout out. I'm interested as to how they would go with Paddy Pimblett bookings going forward. I'm not sure that Moicano is the guy because that's a guy that Paddy doesn't really have a grappling edge on. And if you're forcing Paddy to strike with someone for 15 minutes, we're getting a little hazy if he doesn't clip him with one of his winging hooks. So I'm not sure that that's the direction the UFC goes, but I think 301's a good shout in Brazil. I like Dan Hooker. I like that call out. I like Jalen Turner. Those are probably the two guys that are unbooked that I think make a level of sense for him moving forward. All right. Next fight on the card, Randy Brown, Muslim Salikhov. This was a relatively quick fight. Excuse me. Randy Brown, first round knockout, double jab followed by the straight right, put Salikhov down. I think this was one of Randy Brown's more impressive performances. What'd you guys make of it? Jerry, I believe it is your turn to go first here.
I mean, you can't complain about anything Randy Brown did in that fight. I guess only thing you can knock him for one eye poker, something that happened earlier on. Ultimately, I don't think it would have mattered had that eye poke happened or not. He used his length so well. And even just as soon as they were in the octagon together and as soon as the bell rung, you could see a noticeable size difference. And he knew what he was doing with those, working the jab, working the leg kicks, keeping Salikhov at distance so he can't get grappled down all that much. And relatively straightforward win for Randy Brown.
Yeah, I think same thing. I thought it was a good knockout, good highlight. Looked good. I was just looking at his record too, because I remember he beat. That was when Chaos Williams was on his little run, then beats Francisco Trinaldo, who I actually like that name on a record. And then he lost to Jack Della Maddalena, and then right now he's 2 wins in a row again. So if you thought he was good, I think this fight, just kept that going. He just unfortunately dropped that one to Jack Della Maddalena, who's one of the better fighters in that division. So it's whatever. I think it's a good fight.
Yeah, and Jack Della, relatively hard matchup for him too. Guy that gets inside and throws really hard, and Jack's a good guy, crashing distance, so it makes it harder for Randy to kind of use his length. So I thought that was a hard matchup for him at the time, so I'm not going to hold that too much against him now. And I think Randy Brown has always been a guy with a lot of potential. You look at him in the octagon just based off that size. That's the potential based off size alone. Is noteworthy. So I was glad to see him get a win like this. I'm interested to see if he can keep it going. Obviously, he's been winning, but I think there's a little extra spice on this win. A cleaner performance. He, got the finish first round on top of that. So I'm interested to see if he can keep performances going like this, or maybe he doesn't keep performances going like this, but maybe he starts beating a higher level of competition. That as well would be interesting to see because Randy Brown's a relatively fun guy, really interesting fighter, and I'd like to see him do good things in the future just because he is such an unique guy in that division. I think it's a good fighter to have around. All right. Natalia Silva, Viviane Araujo, the last fight that we are going to really go in depth about before we, throw in our final shout outs for this card. But Viviane Araujo, Natalia Silva, I'm not really sure that we learned much about Natalia Silva. I spoke last week about Natalia Silva, about how I really liked Natalia Silva. That's kind of what I expected. Defend the takedowns. She landed the big shots in the second and third round. The kicks look great. The counters look good. What'd you guys make of her performance? And is this kind of what you were expecting from Natalia, or did she exceed expectations in any way? Jerry, we can go with you first.
Okay, I could go real quick. I turned this on right kind of when the decision was happening and all that stuff. So I didn't get to see this one.
Right, fair enough.
Yeah, this is to an extent what I expected. We talked last week about how I think Viviane Araujo had to kind of get takedowns, and that's put the pressure on Natalia Silva that way, even though Silva does have good ground game. We saw her get taken down once in that first round, and after that, Silva managed to stay on her feet, keep her kind of at a little distance, completely outstruck her on the feet, and that was why I think she won those second and third rounds very convincingly. I don't think it was ever like, oh, maybe this round could go either way. I think it was very straightforward. Lost the first round. Obviously, I have my opinion because of the takedown that happened. Stuffed the takedowns the rest of the way, and I guess only thing that I can say kind of really impressed me is she learned from her mistakes in the first round. Then that goes a bit to coaching, a bit to the experience level. So excited to see what's up next for Natalia Silva because a lot of interesting fighters in that flyweight division up top.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is I am slightly concerned about, like, I don't really think Viviane Araujo was too interested in striking with Natalia Silva. Natalia just hits hard, maybe not even hits hard, but is very quick and is very accurate. Throws a bunch of crazy stuff that you don't really see often. Not really someone you want to strike with. Natalia Silva, good takedown defense, so I can't take her down. So what am I going to do? I'm going to hold her up against the fence until the ref pulls me off. And not attempt to land a takedown, and I'm just going to stall out position so I stop getting punched in the face. I have a suspicion that's going to be a strategy that we see other girls try to follow, especially considering Natalia Silva is relatively small for the weight class. You put her in somewhere, you put her in there with a Macy Barber and Aaron Blanchfield. Those are big physical girls that are probably going to, try and hold her up against the cage. Aaron Blanchfield may have success landing takedowns because she's a very good wrestler, but that could be concern moving forward, but that's something to watch because she's still only 27. Maybe she improves in that area. We'll have to see. But next up, I do hope to see her in there with the top 5, top 6 girl. Right now, you've got girls like Caitlin Chukagian, Lauren Murphy ranked ahead of her. But then once you jump that, then you get to your Macy Barbers, your Manon Fiors, your Rose Namajunas, girls like that are really, really high level. So I'm interested to see who she gets booked up against next and how she looks in that fight because there's a chance that is a, very, very fun fight. And I will say this division is probably the best on the female side of the sport between your champs like Grasso, Valentina, and then your prospects Blanchfield, Fio, Silva. This division actually has some real reasons to get excited moving forward.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of ones that I think would be the next fights to make. Wouldn't mind like a Chukagian or a Firo because those two ladies are very much strikers in the fights that I've seen. So that would test Natalia Silva on the feet. Maybe she can get takedowns there, and then that shows another side of her game. She does have 7 submissions, I want to say, so that's something that she has done in the past. But doing it against top level competition like that would be impressive. And hey, who knows? Maybe in the next couple of years, once we get through all this Grasso and Shevchenko chaos, and then Blanchfield gets her shot, I would think it's possible we could see Natalia Silva. She continues this way, fight for a belt eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to look it up real quick. I think isn't Macy Barber fighting Chukagian?
Yeah, this division is
So I mean, they
pretty
could do winner
up.
then.
I know
they could do winner then.
And Jessica Andrade.
Yeah, I think
I
we've
want to
got.
say.
Yeah, Jessica Andrade has a fight at 115.
Okay.
She's got Rodriguez at 300. You've got Fior and Blanchfield booked up. And then I think you're right with
Fior
Barber
and Blanchfield are fighting each other.
Kagian.
Is that correct? Fior and Blanchfield are fighting? Oh, that'll be
yep. So she'll probably end up with a loser from one of those fights. So I think that makes sense. All right. That is everything we'll go in depth on. Now let's hit with some final thoughts. I can go first because I have mine ready to go. Actually, yeah. Also, I'll go with Miley McCann as my final thought. I don't really love Miley McCann as a fighter, but I will say I think the 115 division is going to suit her much better. I think she finds a lot of success when she has physical advantages. and is bigger and stronger, and that's going to be a lot more frequent at 115. And I am predicting that we get a nice little UFC. Hey, here's a couple softballs for you. So I think we're going to see some softballs for McCann, but I'm interested to see what this turns into, whether it gets back to the hype it was previously, or whether this dies down relatively quickly. Because last time I thought they were going to build her up at 125, and they said, "Hey, here's Aaron Blanchfield," and we put a shutdown on that. I wonder if we get, 2 or 3. Hey, here's this girl that you're going to be able to run through. Like her last fight, Diana Belbita was a softball matchup. She runs through her. I wonder how many of those we get before she gets a tough matchup. But I think Molly McCann made 115, got the job done. So I'll give her some props for that.
Yeah, just want to say on that submission, just the pure pain that it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you heard? Is it Billy Beta screaming when that armbar got put in? That was pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
Is it mine?
Yeah, go ahead. Whichever one of you
just
got
a
one
quick.
ready to go, doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, I don't think I got to do this last time. But my one quick thing was actually my quick thing that I learned for someone that is not the biggest Strickland fan. That Imavov looks like a better and better name to have on the record, though. And I was impressed with this fight. So from him, and in stretches, I do think, like you talked about earlier, if he was worried about gassing out, I just think, and give or take, he's still a prospect in a sense, or he's still coming into his own. I just think that right there is the difference between great fighters and good fighters. Is a great fighter doesn't have to fight in the 5th and 4th round in a fight like that. When you are tattooing them on the feet constantly, eventually you would have to figure out a way to get that finish. So, but overall, I'm more excited to watch his next fight. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yep, I agree with that. And to your point, I think he's 27 as well, 26, 27, 28, somewhere in there. So relatively young guy as well.
One thing I'm going to go with the quickest actual finish, not the 11-second no contest, but Themba Gorimbo. How he didn't get anything for performance of the night for finishing Pete Rodriguez in 32 seconds. Got to give him props for that one. And I loved his post-fight interview where he's like, here's my plan, here's who I'm fighting for, and here's what I want to do. I want to fight. Honestly, I don't think he will fight for the belt by the end of 2024 in the welterweight division, but you never know. Why not?
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, but that's just someone he's only 33. He's had 3 fights in the UFC, so something he could be moving up the rankings in the future. I do want to see him still get a ranked fight at some point instead, but 32 seconds is pretty impressive.
High aspirations for Themba Gorimbo, who wants a title fight in 2024. Didn't get a $50,000 performance bonus for a 30-second knockout, but he got a shout out on the Vendetta Sports Media YouTube channel, so he'll have to live with that instead.
Also, if there's any way to get things done in the UFC, like getting title fights or getting your bonuses, that's telling Dana what to do, because I know Dana loves that. So you're definitely going to get it.
There's a trend with fighters who ask for $50,000 in their post-fight interview, typically don't get $50,000 once they give out the bonuses. Interesting to note there.
And especially there's also a difference between superstars asking for 50 G's and then getting it anyways. So
yes, that is true. All right, moving on to next week's card. Like I said earlier, we've got the main event and the co-main to talk about. We'll start with the main event: Joe Pyfer, Jack Hermansson. This is Joe Pyfer's first ranked opponent. I believe he's 3-0 in the UFC. If I'm wrong, he's 4-0, but I'm pretty sure it's 3. What do you guys make of Joe Pyfer breaking into the rankings at this stage in his career? And what do you make of this matchup? Jerry, we can throw it over to you first.
I mean, he's looked solid so far. He's one of those guys in the middleweight division that's looking, obviously, how old is he? 27, so he's still on the younger side of this division. He's one of those up-and-coming prospects that is exciting to watch. Whereas Jack Hermansson, he's done his time. He's 35. I really don't know how much longer he has left in his career, at least in the UFC, but this is one that I'm excited for. I'm curious to see. I think this is going to end up being more of a grappling match than it is going to be on the feet. For sure, Pyfer's won 2 fights via TKO KO. That was against Alan Medovsky and Gerald Mearshart. We've seen Mearshart get kind of rocked on the feet time and time again. And then he did get a submission his last time out against Abdul Razak Al Hassan. But I'm curious to see where this fight goes. And I do think that this will be by far the biggest test of his career. And I'm still thinking of leaning towards Joe Pyfer, but I'm not confident at all. And my pick could very much change by the time we have the fight night preview come out on Friday.
I just think, kind of like you said, that well, like we talked about earlier, middleweight's middleweight, and we could always use more, not stars, but more hype or just more intriguing fighters, to be honest there. And I think Joe is that. So that's fun. And he has that aura around him too of, I don't know where the story came out, but he hit harder on the machine, that one punching machine, if you know what I'm talking about, the Ngannou. So there's that too, that little thing with him too. So I think it's, it should be good. I'm excited to see him if he can beat a name like Hermansson. That's his first big step up. Even though Hermansson's getting old and hasn't looked the greatest in his last fights, definitely. Also, when Hermansson gets hit hard, he just fights like he's never been in the octagon before. Sometimes, so that will be interesting to see. But anything to get some new names in the middleweight division.
Yeah. I agree with your point about Hermansson. Sometimes he will get hit, and then suddenly things get a little crazy. But I think it's interesting that Joe is getting this type of jump. I don't think it's unfair. I think he's got the talent to compete with Hermansson, but I do find it interesting that he kind of skipped that. I guess I don't know what Hermansson's ranked off the top of my head, but usually you see a guy fight a number 15 and number 14 and number 13, someone who's kind of in and out of the rankings before they get into someone that is, I think Hermansson may be 9 or 10, but Hermansson has been in the rankings 10. He's been in the rankings for a long time, though, in that kind of range of the ranking. So it is interesting to see Pyfer immediately jump to that range, but I think it's a pretty winnable fight for him. Pyfer hits hard as shit, and he's a relatively good grappler. I think he's a relatively underrated grappler. Trains with Sean Brady, and we've seen what Sean Brady has done. Trains with Andre Petrosky, who's got some submission wins in the UFC. So his camp has a lot of good grapplers, and he went out there and submitted a guy last time out. Landed some nice takedowns too. It's not like he jumped into a lucky guillotine. He landed 3 or 4 really solid takedowns on the feet. Really good boxing. I think this is a pretty nice fight for Pyfer. Hermansson really doesn't have much for hands. He can kick a little bit. I mean, he's got some kicks from the outside. He's got a good teep, good body kick, some leg kicks. But I think once Joe works past those, whether he catches them and moves in, however he has to close the distance. Once he closes the distance, I think he lands a big shot, and he can probably defend takedowns. If he can't, I think he can at least survive on the ground with Jack Hermansson. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe gets like a club and sub where he hits him hard and he's got Jack stumbling around and Jack is grappling for his life, and that kind of opens a door for Joe to get to a back or something. But I think Joe wins this fight. One thing I will be intrigued to see is if this fight goes long. If we're suddenly in round 3, if we're suddenly in round 4, how does the cardio look? I haven't seen Pyfer in that type of fight. How does it look? Hermansson's not really a bad guy to test the waters with in rounds 4 and 5 if you can't find the early finish. So those are some of the things I'm looking at in this fight, but I do think it's ultimately going to be Pyfer getting his hand raised.
I wanted to say real quick that for, like you said, pretty quick jump. already for him, or pretty good push that he has right now. And I don't know. I can't remember if it was an interview or something I watched, or Dana was talking about him. Someone asked him a question. I have a feeling like Pyfer's a Dana guy in a sense, so I think that's why there might be some some privilege happening, some Dana White privilege happening.
Yes. He does have Dana White privilege. And the backstory there is it was contender season last summer, or contender series last summer, and he got Lorenzo Fertitta to come to contender series. Fertitta apparently doesn't go out much, and Dana finally convinced him, come see the fights. First 4 fights were terrible, god awful. And then main event was Joe Pyfer, and he knocked his dude clean out. And it was like, oh, thank God somebody did something. Someone saved the night. So then afterwards, he gave the speech where he said, when you come in here to Dana White Contender Series, be Joe Pyfer. So
yeah,
he got a lot of hype off that. And thankfully, sometimes we see these guys get hype, and they absolutely suck. I think Joe Pyfer is legitimately good. So that's a nice breath of fresh air that he actually has skills, and he's not like some, he'll probably get Dana White privilege a little bit. He'll probably get some favorable matchups, but he at least has skill compared to some of the other fighters that we see get that level of push.
Mm-hmm. It's small, but I think it's just like the small comments like that I've seen 2 or 3 times now from him that I'm like, okay, because that's why his name it sounds so like heavy, or why that he might be getting some fans, because Dana says something that's already 30% of UFC fans are jumping on it.
That's true. And then he followed it up with 3 finishes and 3 UFC fights. So he's kind of held his end of the bargain as well. So
for sure,
that helps a lot. Some people go in there and you lose, or you go to a boring 30-27, and all right, we're gonna put you to the side for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Wait for you can do, but it's worked out well for Pyfer. So, like you said earlier, I think we need some new blood in that middleweight division. I think we have some coming with Pyfer and some other guys. So I think this is kind of a start of a trend here. All right, co-main event. I don't know about you guys, but this is kind of a sneaky good fight in my opinion. Dan Ige and Andre Fili, 2 guys that Dan Ige's kind of held the spot in the rankings around that 10, 12, 13 range. Fili, a guy who's seemingly in and out of those rankings, but 2 guys who are more than willing to scrap. And I think we're getting a scrap here. What do you guys make of the co-main event? Anthony, I believe it's your turn to go first.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I'm no, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say, not that I'm a bigger Ige fan than most, but I've never been, like, whenever I see his name on a card, no matter where it's at, I think there's a chance it's probably going to be an entertaining fight. I don't mind the way, like you said, I think he's down for some scraps. So, and everything I just said about him goes even more to Andre Fili, because obviously I really like him, team alpha male guy. Has some spectacular knockouts, has been knocked out spectacularly a couple times too. So I think he's always super game. I feel like he's someone that always has entertaining fights. So I think this is low key banger for the co-main.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is a very underrated fight. I always love Andre Fili when he fights, solely because I love his nickname of Andre Touchy Fili. I just think that's so funny. It's just something that always remembers, and that's something you want with nicknames, is it's memorable. Some of his fights have been entertaining, some not so much. He did come out and win his last one by TKO, so maybe he's coming off a good win in December, so we'll see how that is. Meanwhile, Dan Ige seems like he's kind of fallen off a little bit, losing 4 of his last 6. But you look at the 4 guys who he's lost to, and it's Jun Chen Sung, so the Korean Zombie, Josh Emmett, Eva Loyev, and Bryce Mitchell. Not bad guys to have as losses on your resume, because all 4 of those guys are legitimate. 2 of them have fought for the belt in the last year and a half, one way or another, but it's just one of those things that I'm curious to see if he's kind of taken a toll, because there's a lot of decisions. He's fighting a lot of rounds, and that's something that might benefit him, because I don't know how much Andre Fili has had to go to decision as of late. And that's going to be my question to see what happens. But either way, I think I'm going to lean with Ige. But again, Like the Hermansson fight, that one I'm more confident of. I'm not sure on this one. Pick will probably change throughout the week.
Yeah. Um, Good point about Ige. Like you look at his record, and you're like 4-6 in his last six. What are or four? Yeah, one lost four of his last six. What are we doing here? Then you look at it a little bit deeper. It's like there's a lot of good names on here.
Yeah.
The Josh Emmett fight was very close as well. So was the Bryce Mitchell fight. So like, a couple of things go his way in some of those matchups. Some of those could have turned into wins. Korean Zombie fight, Mozart Evelev fight. Those were a little bit more one-sided, but Korean Zombie at that point was still at the maybe not his peak, but very underrated fighter as well, Korean Zombie. And then Evloev, obviously we've seen him. He just beat Arnold Allen. And the thing I think about Ige is I really like Dan Ige, and I think he's got a clear cap. Like he's not going to be a top 5 guy, but he's going to sit in this portion of the rankings, and he can beat other really good fighters. He's just not going to beat your top tier or maybe your top 2 tiers of featherweights, which is, there's fighters who have that type of career, and it's fine, especially when you can put on an entertaining fight. So these are 2 guys that I think I think both of them are underrated. I'm probably higher than most on both of them. Maybe higher than most isn't the right way to phrase that, but I like both. I think both are underrated. Both are good fighters. So I think this is going to be a really entertaining fight. I'd lean Ige just because his boxing in the pocket is so crisp, and I love those skills. But I mean, if you told me that Andre Fili, set up a really nice head kick, like I wouldn't disagree with you. I think he's got great head kicks. He uses his length great. Maybe he, gets to the back in a scramble, gets a body triangle and finds a rear naked choke. I wouldn't be overly shocked. I think, both these guys have a lot of good skills, and I think we're in for a fairly good matchup here in the co-main. These are the type of fights I like. If we're not going to have, super stacked Apex cards, give me fights like this that I can expect a fun and entertaining fight, and I'm not going to complain too much. So I'm excited for this one, and I have a lean towards Ige at this point.
My one thing that I guess that was a great way to put it. You said you kind of knew he had a cap. You knew what he was. That was my one problem why I said I felt like I was higher on people than most. Because when he had a chance for that, people thought he could be a championship, like real contender. I didn't quite see that. So as soon as he stalled out a little bit, everyone was like, "Oh, he was washed. He's not that good." And it's like, well, I don't think you should have just knew where he was at, kind of to begin with. I thought. And then as for you guys gave your picks, I'm going biased, touchy Philly. So
yeah, understandable. And the other thing on top of that, like 4 of the last 6, he's lost against great fighters. And then we throw him in there with Nate Landwehr and Damon Jackson, and it's like, all right, the level between Damon Jackson and a loss to Moser Evelev, we're talking different stratospheres.
Yeah.
So, and then, from a betting perspective, he loses the fight to a great guy, and then he gets a reasonable price against Damon Jackson and Nate Landwehr. So I'll take it. We can keep that going. All right. Last thoughts on this card. This is not the deepest fight card, but I think there are some other things worth touching on. Do you guys have anything that stands out on the rest of the card, or would you like me to lead this one off?
I mean, I've got just one guy that I'm curious to see what he does. Making his UFC debut, he's won, I want to say, his last 5 fights by TKO knockout, is Carlos Paredes, taking on Trevin Giles. And I'm just curious to see how this guy that won on the Dana White Contender Series his last time out will fare in his UFC debut. So that's just something I'm looking for. Curious to see what happens. Obviously, a big step up, making your UFC debut. There's all those butterflies and all the pressure. We'll see how he fares with that one.
My 2 things. One, shout out to GOAT, Michael Johnson on the card. Always love that. He's either gonna, look like he's 25 again, quickest hands ever, or he might get knocked out, unfortunately. And then the last one I see is buried on the prelims. Max Griffin, shout out. He's from SAC. Was fighting in the. I don't know if he fought on a pay-per-view or he was the co-main on just a fight night. loses one, and now he's like the third fight of the night. So hopefully he gets a win. But
Yeah. I liked a lot of the things you guys said. Jeremiah Wells and Max Griffin. Like, what are we doing burying this on the prelims? You take
exactly.
the Ehor Pateria and Robert Bayachek or whatever that guy's name is, toss them on the prelims. We already know Ehor's getting knocked out. He's a bum, and he doesn't deserve to be in the UFC after what he did to Shogun Rua. That fight was way too competitive for a 41-year-old Shogun Rua. So get him on the prelims. Put Max Griffin, Jeremiah Wells on the main card. I had two fights that really stood out. Jerry, you touched on one of them with Carlos Prates. The other is Boljali Oki. For those that are avid readers of the site, you probably know that I do Dana White Contender Series recaps. Every fight card, I list, give my thoughts on the guys who got the contracts. Thought very highly of Prates and Oki. After the season, I put them in a Google Doc. I didn't publish this, but I listed my favorite fighters and kind of put them in tiers. Oki and Prates were both top tier guys, and I ranked them third and fourth just on my own personal rankings of the guys coming in from Dana White Contender Series. So two guys I really like, and I'm interested to see what they do. Thought very highly of them on Contenders. So I will shout them out, and they're fighting back to back, which is convenient. So that's my shout out. All right. And that is everything we have for today. We'll be back next week, and we have a pay-per-view card to talk about. I'm sure we'll touch on probably Pyfer and Hermansson. Maybe we'll see what else happens that we can get to. But next week, it's about time. We've got a pay-per-view, a good pay-per-view to break down. So we're looking forward to that, and that will be the focus of next week. And make sure you tune in later in the week. I will have our preview posted with that will be every fight on this week's main card, everyone's predictions as well. So make sure you tune into that. But enough of the shout outs. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.